Hello, Think Liberty listeners. Welcome to episode 15 of Tales from the Shire. I know last week I kind of implied, maybe I even said that I was going to be putting out the second half of the Nicholas Sarwark interview this weekend. That's not the case. We had some events happen here in New Hampshire, and I wanted to talk about those. So on April 1st, which is April Fool's Day, there was a rally held at the State House here, and I'll just read from the Facebook event: "The fight for your right to folly on April Fool's Day," and this was put on by one of the gubernatorial candidates here in New Hampshire. I don't know that he'll make the ballot, but it's a man who calls himself nobody. He had his name legally changed for the purposes of running for governor, and running for all forms of different public office. But the details on the page are such that it reads: "Nobody has heard about the governor's shutdown of assembly in New Hampshire. Nobody thinks that's a good idea. Nobody thinks that the government has the authority to do it. Nobody thinks an unjust law should be obeyed. Nobody thinks unjust laws should be violated. Nobody will be at the New Hampshire State House at 2 p.m. on April 1st, 2020. Nobody wants a couple of hundred other people to show up there too. If everybody shows up, nobody will be happy about it. Could everybody help nobody remind the world of our motto, live free or die? Fighting is in parentheses there. Death is not the worst of evils." So they called for about 200 people, I guess is what nobody wanted. About 15 people showed up, and I had on Wednesday, I talked with, no, not Wednesday, Thursday, April 2nd, I spoke with Josh Holmes, who was one of the people who went up to this rally. And I just wanted to get his ideas, what the goals were of this particular group of people, and what it is that they wanted to accomplish, what their grievances were exactly. Josh Holmes also has his own podcast called the Libertarian Veteran Podcast, and he does that with two other veterans of the military. And I don't know. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Welcome to episode 15 of Tales from the Shire. Yesterday, April 1st, you went up to the State House and joined a whole bunch of other people up there protesting something about the government's decrees over the coronavirus. Can you walk me through what your goals were and what your intentions were going up there?
Basically, every time the government says that you don't have a right to assemble, it's on us to break that rule, civil disobedience, to assemble and to show them that the First Amendment still applies, emergency or no emergency. I mean, it's, for example, Congress just put through $2 trillion in bailouts. Last time they put through trillions of dollars of bailouts, or only hundreds of billions, we got Occupy Wall Street. This time they've preempted that by prohibiting gatherings.
Okay, so what actions has the government taken so far as legal actions to prevent these gatherings?
Well, they've posted signs every 20 or so feet all over the State House lawns prohibiting assemblies of more than 10 people. We managed to get about 15 people together. As far as actions, though, all the police did was smile and wave.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like it would be a bit of a logistical nightmare for them to actually go and arrest people because presumably that would put people in a greater threat, putting them in closer quarters together. Did you guys have anyone speak at all, or
the candidate for governor named Nobody gave a great big rant. I think it was Natural Daily News sent out a camera, and Nobody had a prepared speech for that. Okay,
so Natural Daily News, I've never heard of them before.
Me neither.
Yeah. Okay. So Nobody, who's a man from Keene who changed his name to Nobody. What was his speech about? What was he talking about?
Basically, he accused the governor of being tyrannical by assuming powers that he shouldn't have either by right or by law. I mean, they're not his businesses to close. We're all grown-ups. And it's not the sort of thing that the government ought to be doing to decide for everybody.
Mm-hmm. So with the virus that's going on, with the pandemic that's going on, what steps do you think would be appropriate for the government to take?
Well, to give advice.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So one of the things that has happened that a lot of people have actually been following has been the closures of restaurants and things like that. Now there have been takeout and things like that, but there's been no sit-ins and things like that. Did this particular group talk about other forms of activism to maybe like address that or other closings and things like that? Or did you guys just get together and make demands or make a presentation for yourself?
No, I don't think there was any discussion of follow-on protests. The main point was to remind everybody that you still have your First Amendment rights.
Mm-hmm.
I think what this whole episode exposes is that we have a system set up right now where the government, the monopoly on force, have the power to force everybody to react to any given crisis the way that they would have us act. But they're not angels. They're not perfect. They're just as liable to be wrong as anybody else. And their monopoly prevents experimentation and prevents flourishing. Mm-hmm. I'm really happy, for example, that Sweden hasn't taken the kinds of measures that we've seen in the United States, because I'm happy that we will have a control group against which to judge whether or not we've even made the right choice.
Well, so how well do you think that control group can kind of work? Because right now, I don't remember which federal official it was talking about when they were asked about Sweden, who was saying, well, one of the big reasons Sweden's not seeing the issues that we're seeing in America and that we're seeing in Italy and other places like that is because Sweden's not seeing travel from China and from the early points of infection. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that as far as throwing off these controls?
I'm not in a position to judge it.
Okay. So the group as a whole, were you guys still practicing social distancing, or was it like high fives and normal greetings and things like that? Or
I mean, I don't know what is right or what is wrong, but I don't accept prima facie that flattening the curve or that social distancing are the right responses. They're the official responses. They're the politically correct responses. But in my childhood, we got chickenpox on purpose at parties.
Mm-hmm. Well, so what's your response to the people then? Forget flatten the curve from what the government's doing as far as decrees and orders and things like that, and think and like just focusing on it from more of a like suggestion perspective. What are your issues with it from that point in time, or do you not have any?
Well, it's not a suggestion when the person who holds your liquor license and your restaurant license tells you to close. That's an order, and it's enforceable against your livelihood. So all the people whose businesses are shuttered right now because the government told them so have been threatened, whether it was explicitly or not. The fact that they have to be credentialed by the government to even be in business puts them in a disadvantageous position, one they shouldn't start out in.
All right, so we're in Manchester right now, and the city of Manchester recently put out orders to not enforce eviction during the pandemic. I don't know if what timeline they put on it, but you work for a property management company. What has been the outlook in the office on that order?
Well, looking at it as a libertarian, I see the government introducing a perverse incentive. If people feel free not to pay their rent now because they can't be evicted now, that incentivizes them to not pay their rent and then rack up months and months of unpaid rent accruing that will then prevent them from being able to rent in the future. And when all this is over, they'll still owe that money.
So I'm sure you maybe don't know this, but do you expect many people to be taking advantage of that, like in the properties that you guys manage, or?
It's a big worry, but we don't have any data yet. It's all too early.
Okay. So, I mean, have you had people come to you and say like, oh, I've been laid off, I need a little bit of help going forward during the pandemic? Do you know, or?
No, I'm in the maintenance side.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so prior to being a libertarian and holding these views that the government shouldn't be enforcing these orders that they are, you were in the military, and you were at one point in time potentially one of the people who maybe would have been enforcing these things if it got super far down the road. The National Guard and other things like that have to go.
That happened the first year I was in the military.
Mm-hmm.
In 2005, Hurricane Katrina happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the Louisiana National Guard was in Iraq. And so National Guards from other states had to come into Louisiana to enforce the government's edicts about where you can and can't stay in your home, and to unconstitutionally confiscate weapons from civilians in Louisiana. So the National Guard was activated in an emergency to violate your constitutional rights while I was in the Army. And I saw that, and then I went and violated Iraqis' natural rights by grabbing their guns.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so to, I guess, some of the bigger examples of aggressive law enforcement in the country right now would be like down in Rhode Island, where they're kicking New Yorkers out and trying to send them back to New York. What is it that you would say to the people who are enforcing those things right now, as far as your own growth away from that enforcement class, I guess?
Well, they're being tempted to play God. They have an emergency, and that makes them afraid, and they want to act. But if they don't choose the right actions and they enforce their bad choice on everybody else, they're bringing us all down with them. Back around to gun grabbing, in 2006, I confiscated weapons in Baghdad, Iraq. And in 2007, there was a sectarian cleansing of the Sunni Muslims from Baghdad. So tens of thousands of people were killed, hundreds of thousands of people lost their homes as a downstream effect of a bad government policy that I personally enforced after I saw that same government policy and personally morally disapproved of it in Louisiana. So I knew it was right, and I didn't do anything about it. And now I have to live with that on my conscience, that there are people dead as a downstream consequence of something that I physically did with my own two hands.
Yeah, that's rough. All right, so then going forward, how have you been personally responding to the pandemic, as far as like actions that you've taken in changing the way that you live your life, or have you been going about things like business as usual?
Well, I don't participate in social distancing, and my job is deemed essential, so I'm still working a normal week. The one big change is I'm doing all my mom's grocery shopping because she's borderline elderly and has a lung problem. So being responsible and making sure that she isn't exposed to people who might be sick.
Okay, so one of my thoughts going back to the rally at the State House was that a lot of the people who were going to be there were potentially people who maybe weren't taking the virus seriously or thought it was not necessarily a hoax, but maybe some of them did think it was a hoax or some type of China thing like that. I've heard a few different conspiracies, and one of my fears from hearing that there was going to be this rally at the State House was that it was going to attract a lot of those types of people. Did you recognize that there?
No, I didn't hear any conspiracy theories while I was there.
No.
The main gist of it seemed to be that either everybody is overreacting, or even if they are right, we have a right to decide for ourselves and make mistakes rather than be told.
All right. I agree totally that we should have the right to make our own mistakes. I guess one of the biggest caveats here in the whole natural right ideas becomes liability for infecting other people. And this might be very into the weeds for this particular conversation, but like, do you think people who are infected then have an ethical obligation to prevent them, to keep themselves away from other people at this times, or?
Yes, if you know that you're infected with a disease, you have an ethical obligation not to spread it. We already have that precedent with AIDS and a whole bunch of other things.
So if the government came out and took away all the other restrictions that they've been having so far, and they just enforced that and said, like, if you've got this, you need to stay home, would that have been something that you would also protest over, or how would you feel about that?
Well, I don't trust the government to enforce it. They have all kinds of incentives to conduct a false flag and create an emergency when they, let's say, admit that they lost $1 trillion like they did on September 10th, 2001. So if they just blew $2 trillion trying to prop up the repo market and it didn't work, and that means that they have to spend $6 trillion they don't have, and that's going to lead to mass protests or disapproval or anything, putting something else in the news is in their interest. Bill Clinton did it with bombing Iraq while Monica Lewinsky was on the stand.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you think that the protest yesterday was a success in what you guys wanted to get across?
Oh, yeah. No, it's okay. Every time that people assemble and have the opportunity to have their voice heard and they don't get their skulls cracked by the police, that's American freedom.
Yeah, getting your skull cracked by the police is absolutely not American freedom. So that does make sense that the inverse would be. Is there anything else that you want to leave my listeners with before I let you go?
Well, if they want to hear more, maybe they'll listen to libertarianveteranpodcast.com. We have some good stuff there.
Yeah, that's yours, right? How have you guys been doing with that?
It's a slog. It takes us a while to get things edited because none of us is an expert, but we're putting out content just about once a month right now, and I want to bring it up to once a week.
And where can someone go to find that?
libertarianveteranpodcast.com.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much, Josh.
Thanks, AJ.
Thank you all for listening to episode 15 of Tales from the Shire. I hope this has been sort of an interesting look at one of the people who's maybe a little bit more pissed off than even the rest of the other libertarians about everything that's going on around coronavirus and around government action. Again, Josh Holmes has his own podcast that can be found at libertarianveteranpodcast.com. I'm looking at it now at their website right now, and I can see that the last episode was about Starship Troopers and their own sort of dive into that. And Robert Hyland's one of my favorite authors, so I'm going to give that a listen for sure. And I hope you guys do as well. Again, his podcast can be found at libertarianveteranpodcast.com. I've been your host, AJ Olding. This has been episode 15 of Tales from the Shire on the Think Liberty Network. You can find us at think-liberty.com or anywhere that podcasts are found. If you want to interact with us, we're on the Facebooks and Twitters and all the other social medias that are out there. My show specifically has a Facebook page where you can interact with me. And if you really enjoyed the show, you can find us on Patreon. Just search Think Liberty when you get in there. It'll come right up. Please share this with all your friends and family. Thank you all very much.